Today we're talking about growing zucchini in raised beds. G'day there, I'm Dana from Pewakaka Valley Homestead. I am out weeding my garden and I have noticed that some of my zucchinis are really coming online and are producing a huge amount of zucchinis, and unfortunately I've lost one. I think it's to pest damage. It seems to be well and truly eaten by something. It's had a good old feed and it has damaged quite a few of the leaves. On the upside, whatever it was has moved on and it's got quite a few new leaves happening. So this might be a bit of a late bloomer, but look, it's got a wee male flower there happening. So this will continue to make some fruit for us. It just hasn't done yet and it's just having a bit of a slow start. Zucchini are really easy to grow once you get them established, but they can be quite difficult to get established in the first place. I always plant probably about twice as many seeds as I think I'm going to need, but the reality is once you get a good producing zucchini, you're going to have so many zucchinis that you're just not going to know what to do with them. The zucchini is a type of summer squash. It's also known as courgette. Basically, either of those names just means baby marrow. So if you are like me and forget to check your zucchinis regularly, you'll probably find yourself with a massive marrow at some point. This often happens to me at the end of the season where for one, we're a little bit sick of eating zucchini by then, and I just tend to accidentally forget to check in on them, and all it takes is a week of not checking and suddenly you have yourself a massive marrow. I usually start my zucchini seeds in early springtime. And I start them in cell trays, and I just put one seed in each cell, and I'll usually grow 6 to 8 zucchini plants to start with. For one reason or another, often either they won't come through, they won't germinate, maybe you'll lose a plant or two, or sometimes they just fail to thrive, they just don't do so well. As a family, we tend to use 3 to 4 zucchini plants worth of zucchini, and we're quite a decent sized family. There are 6 of us. Our vegetable garden made up completely of raised beds, and I find them brilliant for growing zucchini in. They love the nice, deep, really rich soil. We have a lot of compost in here. To be honest, when we built the beds, we mostly filled them up with compost just because it gives them such good nutrients. Zucchinis don't really like having wet feet, so if you don't have raised beds to grow them in, the other option is to grow them in what's called a mound, which is literally when you put a pile of nutritious goodness, so compost, manure, and you put it up on top of the surface of your garden. And then you put your seeds straight in the top of there, or if you're using transplants, put your plants straight into the top of that mound. A mound or a raised bed, both of those things, the soil warms up faster. Zucchini does like the soil to be warm before you put them in, and also it allows you to put a decent pile of nutrients in there. They are heavy feeders. They need a decent amount of manure or compost or something to keep them well fed for them to grow well. It allows the roots to not be sitting in a big soggy pile of water because that will cause them to rot and the plant itself will die off. When you're planting out your seedlings or even sowing your seeds, it's really tempting to cram as many zucchini in a space as you possibly can. Zucchini, unfortunately, are one of those plants that will succumb to mildew, which is a fungal infection, if there's not enough air circulating around to stop that happening. So to avoid mildew on your plants, to be honest, a little bit of mildew at the end of the season is pretty much inevitable. It's okay, it is what it is. You can just cut those mildewy leaves off, or if you really want to, or if it's happening earlier in the season, you can dilute a little bit of milk in with some water. So I would do probably a gallon of water, which is about 4 litres of water with a cup of milk in it, and spray that on your plants, and that's usually enough to just the once, maybe twice, to combat any kind of mildew that's happening. But a little bit of mildew's not the end of the world for the plants. They will continue to produce anyway, and as I say, it's often what takes them out at the end of the season if the frost doesn't get them first. Your best way of avoiding mildew and all those fungal problems, and also to reduce pest pressure for your zucchinis, is to make sure that they're well spaced apart. I place mine about probably 2 feet apart, which is about 60 centimeters. Give them a decent amount of room because the plants themselves will grow really large, especially if you're giving them enough water and enough food. This is the garden bed. You'll have to ignore the lettuce that I pulled out yesterday. I'm just going to let that compost in place, but we've got one zucchini there, about a 2 foot space. We've got another one there, and another one over the end. So this is a 6 foot long bed. I think it's 2.4 meters long, and we've only got the 4 zucchini along. You can see the 2 at the end, the one at that end and the one at this end are the 2 that are doing the best, and these 2 in the middle have both been affected by whatever decided to eat them. If all chance of frosts have passed at your place, you can sow your seeds exactly where you're going to be planting them. Often you'll find that seed sown, particularly for squash plants, in place will actually grow a lot better and a lot stronger plants than transplants do. However, if you're like us and have a bit of a shorter growing season, we always like to get our seeds started off somewhere nice and warm, either in the tunnel house or inside. And that gives them a good head start, and then we plant them out when they're about 4, maybe 6 inches high, so about 10 to 15 centimeters. So they're sort of a decent sized little seedling when we put them out into the garden. Now, people often get worried with zucchini when the first lot of flowers come out and they're not producing any actual zucchini. And the trick is the first lot of flowers that a plant will usually produce are actually usually just male flowers. Partly that's because they're easier for them to produce, and also they need the male flowers there and open to be able to pollinate the female flowers. Now you can see here, this is a male flower. It's got a thin stalky little stem. It's finished flowering. This one over here has a wee hoverfly hanging out in it. And these female flowers, these ones have, oh, that one's got a wee bit of rot on the end. But these are what the female, these were female flowers. You can see one over the back there. That flower has just closed and it's growing itself a nice fresh little zucchini there. This is a new female flower that's only opened in the last day or so, and you can see just how thick the stem is down the bottom there. That's what will turn into the zucchini. If you're wanting to keep your own seeds from your zucchinis, you need to be able to ensure that they are only being pollinated with the same type of pollen. So squashes in general will cross-pollinate really easily, which means if you try and save seed from them, what you'll end up with is a cross between the 2 different types of squash that have between the zucchini and the other squash, or however the mixture has happened. So if that's something you want to do, what you need to do is find a female flower just as it's starting to open, stick a paintbrush inside the male flower, or even pull the male flower off is the other option. But if you use a paintbrush, you can stick it inside the male flower, flick it around so you get plenty of pollen on it, pop it inside the female flower, flick it around to get all the pollen in there, and then you actually need to tie the top of the female flower closed to keep any bees out that are carrying pollen from any other plant. And usually if you're going to do that, then it's a really good idea just to put a loose thread around the stem or something that's going to demark that that particular zucchini is the one that you know you've pollinated properly with the same type of pollen, and that's the one you're going to be keeping for seed. Now zucchinis don't send out vines in quite the same way that other squash plants do, unless you've got a specific type that does vine, but usually most of them don't. But you can put a wooden stake in here, and as it grows you can attach it to the stake, and that will help encourage the plant to not fall over. If they fall over too hard, they can snap their stem, and that's often the end of your zucchini plant. So you can tie them onto a stake. These ones aren't tall enough yet to be able to show you how to do that, but you can tie them on and encourage them to grow up a stake, and that is a good way of keeping your plant producing. Another tip with them is as these big leaves are getting old and haggard, especially if you've planted them a bit closer than what I have and they're all in a bit too close, you can remove, just with a sharp knife, just come along and snap off these bigger leaves. You'll usually find it's the older leaves that pick up the mildew first, so you can come in with a sharp knife and just pull out these older, bigger leaves and throw them into your compost or get rid of them completely. And that is a good way of keeping your plant healthier for longer. It helps keep the mildew at bay, and you'll find that your plant produces for a lot longer that way. Another thing that's worth doing is keeping the weeds away. Zucchini isn't the biggest fan of competition, so if you can keep the weeds down, you'll get a lot better harvest from them. You can also feed your zucchini every couple of weeks with a liquid tea, a seaweed solution or a manure tea, something like that. The more fertility they have, the faster they're going to grow and the more they're going to produce for you. There are a few bugs that are quite common to have as a problem with zucchini. One of them is one called a vine borer or a zucchini borer or a squash borer. It has a few different names, and it's a little grub that will bore into the stalk of your plant. If you're having trouble with that on one plant, you can just cut that piece of branch, I guess you call it, the stem, and flick the bugs out. If you're having that on multiple ones, what you can do to prevent them getting on there is to wrap your stems in some tin foil, and that can be enough to stop them getting in there. Aphids will often attack zucchinis, especially the weaker looking ones, and you can find that caterpillars and other such grubs, for the caterpillars and those sorts of things, often a dusting of some diatomaceous earth or some Derris dust can be enough to get rid of them. For aphids and whitefly, I like to use just some soapy water, maybe with a little bit of baking soda in it, and just spray that on a couple of times a week, and that's usually enough to get rid of those. I hope you found this video really useful. If you have, hit the like button, and I will see you in the next one.